Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work. Thanks again for making this one of the most downloaded podcasts about the future of work. If you enjoy what we do, please like, comment, and share in your favorite podcast app. And we'll keep sharing amazing conversations like the one we have for today. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. I'm also an investor in and advisor to more than 30 AI-first startups and a firm believer in the power of technology to make humans better. If you're passionate about changing the world with AI, or maybe looking for your next adventure, we should talk. We learn from AI thought leaders weekly on this show. We've learned from over 150 of them over the past couple years we've spent together. And of course, the added bonus is you get one AI fun fact each week. Today's fun fact: personalization algorithms from Netflix to Amazon to TikTok assume that our past behavior reflects who we are and what we want. But what about when our engagement patterns are inconsistent with either or both of those? Manish Raghavan from the Harvard Center for Research on Computation and Society and an assistant professor at the MIT Sloan School of Management released a fascinating paper recently summarizing the consequences when our online behavior doesn't actually reflect our values. The researchers consider different ways to measure user happiness with their online experiences. Now, optimizing for clicks or even revenue often leads to less satisfied users. What the researchers introduce is concepts like span, or time spent on platforms over a long time period, versus what they call moorishness, or the short-term content consumption patterns of users. It's an interesting study because it addresses the sociological impact of algorithms on human behavior. Just raising our awareness about how algorithms work and how they manipulate our attitudes is a really important consideration for anyone bringing new AI-first technology and to the market. And obviously, it's something we talk about almost weekly here. We'll link to the full article in the show notes. I encourage you to read more of the research report, and maybe we'll get Manish on an upcoming episode. Manish, if you're listening, send me a note. We'll talk. Now, shifting to this week's conversation, we've discussed how AI is helping service agents deliver better customer experiences with great guests, memorable discussions like the one with Mahesh, CEO of Solvy, which was recently acquired by Zoom. Recently, we met Gadi Shamia from Replicant. We met Harish from Entropy Labs. Every aspect of the customer service experience is being reimagined with automated insights from AI models. Whether it's using bots to answer questions, to routing calls, to coaching live agents. Today, we get to focus on AI-mediated conversation technology, which helps match the customer to the best agent based on skills and an automated analysis of customer emotion. It's an emerging field, and I'm excited because today we'll meet one of the pioneers. Rana Gujral is the CEO of Behavioral Signals after a distinguished career in tech at companies like Logitech, Ties, which he founded in 2014, before its acquisition by Alchemy and Kronos. Rana is also a popular speaker at events like the Mobile World Congress and Voice Summit. He is a contributor to publications, including TechCrunch and Forbes, and an active investor and startup advisor. I've been looking forward to this one. Without any further ado, Rana, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the podcast. Let's kick off by maybe having you share a little bit more about your background and, of course, how you got into this space.
Well, first off, thank you for having me on this podcast, Dan. It's a real pleasure. I've heard great things about it and excited to be here. I'd say, I've had the fortunate experience to be part of several iconic product journeys. During the early years of my career, I worked at public companies such as Logitech and Kronos, where I had the opportunity to be part of the development of some best-in-class products that enjoyed tremendous commercial successes. In 2012, I had this amazing opportunity to be part of a core turnaround team for an iconic company called Cricut. where I led the initiative to build a first of its kind, innovative product for the DIY community, and affect its turnaround from EBITDA of negative 100 million to plus 12, a little bit over 2 years. And that was an amazing journey. Eventually, Cricut did its successful IPO at a 4.4 billion valuation. We're really proud of that. In 2014, I launched a SaaS machine learning company called Ties, where we set out to improve archaic business processes. The value creation was instant for us, and we enjoyed rapid growth that came out of that. It was eventually acquired by Alchemy. I came on board as CEO at Behavioral Signals in December of 2018. And the company, it focuses on looking out in the future and spearhead the transformation of conversational AI using emotion and behavioral science. And we'll obviously talk a lot more about that today. What we do is we apply our new age behavioral AI to the existing NLP and NLU technologies, and in the process unravel unique experiences and capabilities. A lot of them are first to market, both in the human to human and the human to machine interactions.
Rana, describe how a typical customer uses behavioral signals.
The solution itself involves building profiles of customers and call center agents based on past interactions. The typical customers are essentially companies that are interested in either improving the outcome, which is hinging on the underlying conversation, such as improving revenues or improving collections, or the more usual typical CCaaS KPIs like customer experience, customer satisfaction, reducing average handle time, improving first call resolution, et cetera, et cetera. How they use it? First off, we create these profiles based on previous interactions, previous voice interactions, and we call them conversational bioprints. These profiles are then fed into a predictive model to determine which agent should be paired with a specific customer in the future so that the desired outcome is achieved. The profiles consist of a set of behavioral and emotional related metrics. For example, whether the customer is negative or polite or has a known tendency to get agitated, but also essentially core essential dynamics of how you converse as an individual, as a person. And we extract that essentially largely from the non-spoken element of a conversation, which is really the tone of voice, intonations, pitch and tonal variance, prosody, etc. Then once we have those profiles, the predictive model that we have is then employed to essentially assess the compatibility of all possible profile pairs and make specific recommendations regarding who should speak to whom in a given context. So it's essentially what we've built is an example of a limited memory AI and has been trained using machine learning and several thousand past interactions associated with their corresponding outcomes. The way it works is essentially the rapport that can be influenced by the right conversations and the right responses at the right times is essentially what we're looking to optimize. And whether it's a sales call with a prospect, support conversation with a customer, or a difficult conversation in collections, businesses eventually work on the actual interactions between real human. It's really the affinity between two humans that really matter at the end of the day. And we're looking to really optimize for that particular dynamic, the affinity, the rapport, the conversation dynamic in the moment for that one call or the second call that they need to have, and everything else really comes out of that.
You're talking to a largely technical audience. Tell us how the self-learning behavior works. Are you using a neural net? What's the AI architecture?
Yeah, so when it comes to machine learning, we're mainly utilizing deep learning and NLP in our behavioral signals processing analytics model. So to explain this a little better, we pioneered a field called behavioral signal processing based on a decade's worth of research. A lot of that it's published in public corpora. We're very also fortunate to have many awards on that. And what we do is we automatically detect information that's encoded in the human voice from audio and measure the quality of the human interaction. And it's a emerging discipline that bridges engineering and behavioral sciences and aims to quantify and interpret human interaction and communication through using various computing innovations. And so essentially, a deep learning AI analyzes how something is being said for the most part. So in a conversation, there are obviously two dynamics. It's the spoken word, which is what is being said, and it's the non-spoken elements of conversation, which is how something is being said. And we, for the most part, analyze the non-spoken elements, the pitch and tonal variance, prosody, tonality, and measure or extract a variety of very advanced signals from those essential dynamics of a conversation. The signals can be bucketed into three buckets: emotions like anger, happiness, sadness; behaviors such as engagement, empathy, politeness. And you can build advanced classifiers on top of these raw level signals, such as predicting stress, predicting duress, building a set of advanced classifiers that get into the propensity indicators. For example, predicting a propensity to buy or propensity to pay, etc. Now, to get into the neural nets part of it, I mean, our technology uses machine learning to train its models that support our emotion recognition technology. The process goes much deeper. In simpler terms, the audio recordings are first processed to separate speech from noise or silence, and then determine who spoke when. Essentially, diarization, which we do real time. Then we extract a rich set of interaction level and speaking style related features such as pause, duration, speaking rate, intonation related characteristics at various temporal resolutions. And overall, more than 600 features are used to represent a single utterance in the recording in the domain of emotions and behaviors. So that's sort of like, all the sort of like the sausage making factory. And based on these features, we then train a set of deep models to identify various emotional and behavioral states. And then the KPIs that are more relevant to our customers are then built, domain-specific KPIs are built on top of these features that we train on these deep models.
So I would imagine that the ability of the machine learning models to detect these or accurately create models for these nonverbal signals is highly dependent on two external variables. And you mentioned one of them, I'll call it the quality of the voice sample, but things like background noise and volume and things like that. The other one is accents. If presumably you're training most of the voice samples you get are in English. Talk to us about how you control for model quality with respect to those two external variables that I would imagine would greatly impact your ability to collect nonverbal signals.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I mean, I think what we do really addresses that dynamic in a very unique way. As I said, in a conversation, there are two specific aspects to look into. The more common aspect that the typical conversational AI engine processes or analyzes is a spoken word. So I'd say for the most part, vast majority, if not almost all of the conversational AI systems that you see out there are essentially extracting intelligence from the spoken word. They're using an ASR, some sort of a transcription engine to convert the audio into words and then try to extract all the meaning from the spoken word. We have taken a different approach. We ignore the spoken word in its entirety. We do not process the spoken word at all. We go behind the spoken word and we're focused on the pitch and tonal variance, intonations, prosody, and we're really focused on how something is being said. So with that, the actual language or the accent or the dialect is immaterial to us. By the nature of our implementation, our technology is language agnostic. You could be having a conversation in foreign language or a multiple language or with multiple accents or dialects. None of that is processed. Another neat little advantage is that it makes the conversation or the implementation really very secure and private. Your spoken word is never processed, and as a result, nothing to redact, GDPR ready out of the box, right? So there are tremendous advantages. Now, a common question that is asked, which I'll proactively answer, is, well, how does it work for languages that speak in very different ways? I'm sure you're going to ask that. There are tonal languages, and then there are languages that are not tonal. And there are some languages that speak in high pitch tones, and there are others in soft pitch tones. And so essentially, without getting into the deep sort of gory sort of technical implementations behind the scenes, what you have to understand is that when you're looking at extracting a specific signal, let's say it's anger or excitement or something like that, you're looking at a point of inflection from a baseline. When you measure that on different language data sets, you realize that the point of inflection for a signal that might be construed as anger is almost identical across humanity. The baselines are not identical, right? So the baselines vary. And so different language sets have different baselines. And so you have to recalibrate the baseline for a language set that you may have never worked at. And so we started to work on that problem, and we've gotten really good at that. So which means that, if you were to start on or apply the engine on a language set that we've never worked on, we would need a very small amount of data, like 10 to 15 hours of data to calibrate the baseline for, say, Tibetese. And off to go. I mean, we can run the engines on that, and we know we don't need any dependency on availability of spoken word data, which it doesn't exist for a lot of these languages, and it works just as well as it would work for English.
You did, in fact, anticipate exactly my next question, but I'm going to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
So what you're telling me is, if you train on voice content, let's say it's largely English, or it doesn't really matter, you establish some baseline for these variables, let's call it English or something, then what you're saying is, if I were to apply that model's ability to predict various kinds of intent or emotion from these signals in German or Japanese or Arabic or Hebrew, etc., that I could change the baseline for what those variables indicate in terms of emotion, and it would be fairly accurate across the languages if I just applied a different baseline.
Yes, exactly. And so we have worked on a variety of languages, and so a lot of those models with those recalibrated baselines already exist out of the box. And if you were to work on something that we've never worked on, we would need a very small amount of data, and we would go into it with a recalibrated baseline, and those engines work pretty much across the board on all languages. Now, there hasn't really been a solution like this before. In the past, or even now, you're really working on high quality data sets for those language models to work. Because you're really focused on the spoken word, and the spoken word vary greatly. So you're looking at different grammars and different way of saying something. You really need to understand the language sets to be understanding the emotions and behaviors behind it. But we also believe fundamentally, like, even if that is solved for, spoken word is a very inferior way to extract emotions and behaviors. We know in English itself, I mean, you could say something and mean 5 different things just by saying it differently. And so if you're just focused on the spoken word, how do you really know how the speaker feels, or what behavior or emotion the speaker is exhibiting, just by processing the spoken word, because you have no context of how the word was actually spoken. And this is really, I use this example a lot, is like, there was this promise of our virtual assistants like Alexa and Siri to be our actual virtual conversation companions. And that hasn't obviously materialized, because it solved part of the problem. Of course, it's solved for the NLP, and the NLU understands your language. It speaks your language. It also has the compute power to search and whatever, but it can't hold a conversation. Holding a conversation is a high bar. To hold a conversation, you got to do NLP, NLU, and emotional behavioral science. Because just by understanding what you're saying is not enough for me to come up with a response. I need to understand if you relate to what I'm saying. Are you engaged or disengaged? Are you happy or sad or excited, etc.? Because that's how my brain processes my response. And so that's really the missing piece. The question is, how are you going to solve for that? That piece, emotion, is complex. It's multimodal. You express emotions in many different ways: facial expressions, body language, words. and also tone of voice. And you could process all of that, but if you had to focus on the one which is the most superior, and potentially can just hold its own in absence of other modality, it's the tone of voice. And that's been really our focus, from a science perspective.
So you again partially anticipated my next question, but I want to spend a little more time on this. So we've had a variety of interesting conversations on this podcast about the future of various kinds of voice analytics technologies, this being a fascinating one. We haven't really ever focused specifically on emotional behavioral science with respect to voice content. But I always have to ask, given that I think it's mostly kind of a platitude in our space, that AI all comes down to being a data problem. And I think it's non-controversial to say that the big four, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Apple, own the vast majority of all voice content. That's how it's all generated. They'd be the incumbent to be able to build models to detect emotion beyond the kind of typical conversational assistant, parlor tricks that they can do. You'd think that they'd have such an unfair advantage if they wanted to do like what behavioral signals is doing and apply voice analytics to, call center, workflow. What's your defense of how behavioral signals stands alone, even when you have a massive data disadvantage?
I mean, what you see in especially in the the deep tech side of the industry, that sometimes innovation is not really entirely dependent on access to resources and data. You need a variety of other ingredients to get to success. Look, there's two things to sort of unpack there. One is sort of where is this industry going, and is this relevant, and what some of these big players should be and potentially are focused on. First off, voice is a very powerful measure of deducing the emotional state of mind. We as humans project out a lot of affect in signals in terms of how we're feeling, whether it's passion, anger, sadness. There's a bunch of behavioral signals. A lot of that comes out by what we're saying, how we're saying, the tone of voice. And a lot of those translate into really applying towards the variety of KPIs that the human-to-human communication dynamic completely depends on, but also the human-to-machine dynamics are more and more dependent on. So with that, I'm sure there's a lot of innovation and research that's happening inside of these companies, and they have capabilities in that space. We've been at it for a long time. The company is relatively new, but our founders who are very well renowned, Sri, who's really behind building some of these early models, is the founder and executive director of SAIL, which is right now, I'd say, one of the top institutes for speech and linguistics, etc. And the technology itself has been in the labs for over 2 decades, and it has been in the works, and we've applied it towards a variety of industrial use cases. When we first started off, we were looking at very different use cases. Like we were looking at maybe building models and engines that can help a kid suffering with autism to have a tool at their his or her disposal to have better interactions, because your brain's not processing some of those emotional behavioral states. What if we can help you with that? I'd say up till very recently, the technology was incredibly interesting, but not really to a point where you could really build compelling business use cases. Because what you have to sort of think about is when you're looking at capability like ours, or for that matter, any deep tech implementation, you have to compare with human ability, right? Because that's where essentially what you're looking to do. So how does a human do it? And how good is the technology or the engine in comparison to a human? And so you do that using an F-score, and that's not the only way to do it, but there are other ways to do it. F-score, for the audience, it's it's a common way to measure common deep tech capabilities, and it's a combination of precision and recall. Precision being accuracy, recall being false alerts, and usually a score between 0 and 1, 1 being the highest it can be, or you can think of it as a percentage, 100% to 0%. And so when you think about an average human's ability, average human brain's ability to deduce emotions and behaviors from the tone of voice, you're looking at an F score of about 0.8. Obviously, it varies between the sexes and other, different people, different humans, but that's the average. We recently crossed that threshold a couple of years ago of 0.8. Currently, our engines are, breaking the 0.9 barrier. So it's like 0.9, 0.923, which means we're not just as good as a human, we're significantly better than a human. And that now makes it really exciting. So we've had a significant lead in this space. We obviously also have worldwide patents on human emotion recognition on the tone of voice. And the last few years have been the point of inflection where it's becoming really interesting, but the technology itself has been in work for over 2 decades. So we feel confident about our ability to compete with the large players. We have also been very fortunate through some of our commercial angles in terms of the use cases that we've built to get access to tremendous amounts of data. And we've processed at this point tens of millions of phone calls and voice conversation between agents and clients, and that have helped us improve our engines significantly. Obviously, there are a variety of other use cases that you can apply the technology to, which currently we're not focused on, and we're always looking for partner opportunities with companies that have had those visions. Like, so for example, someone's looking at putting this in a brain of a robot or building a component of an AGI. Not our focus as a company, but we would love to work with them, share our technology, have them use our engines to go build that piece out. So I feel it's still very, very early. From Gartner's estimations, recent hype cycles, which we had a fair amount of mention in, looks at emotion recognition still very early stage. And according to them, the amount of market that has really been captured so far has been like 1-3%, which is like super early days in terms of what we can do with a technology like this. So I'd say, there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of players. And I'd say at this point, it's worth partnering and pairing up and, jointly delivering towards the use cases than worrying about competition. And we're not really at this point worried too much about that.
So we always like to come back to the ethics of automated decision-making. And first off, that's an amazing achievement. That F score above 0.9 indicates very high quality automated decisions. But let's take the 0.1 where, again, that's very high precision at a high recall. But let's talk about the false positives. What are the potential adverse impacts of when, even based on your current use case for customer service, if the automated decision about emotional signals is incorrect, what could happen?
Yeah. So, I think the impact is directly dependent on the applied use case, right? There are some use cases where that impact might be exaggerated. There are other use cases where that impact is fairly minimal. Our primary implementation is around finding your conversational partner as a human. And that's a macro level analysis. That's less dependent on your in the moment mood and behavior, which is how are you feeling right now. Because that might not be representative of who you are as a person. And you might be expressing an emotion and behavior that might be actually not very like you. And so when you're looking at a macro level analysis, which is what we're looking at, is trying to understand the individual human's overall larger conversational dynamic profile. And at that point, we're eliminating a lot of these false alerts and noises, and sometimes you're getting a false read on a certain specific of a segment of an audio conversation, but that gets eventually evened out. But I'd say your point is valid. So we've also built some cutting edge stuff, which we're testing the markets with, and those are in the arena of propensity indicators. actual science behind that is once you have a good handle on the state of mind, behavioral, emotional, and the cognition, and the domain of the conversation or the context of the conversation, which is, hey, what is the nature of this conversation? Is it a doctor-patient conversation, client salesperson? You could predict intent of the participants, and so that becomes really exciting. Okay, so you could apply these models to predict if a client will buy or not buy, or will the debt holder pay or not pay. And you could do it in the moment, right? So we've built some of these models where we're able to predict a buy intent within the first 20 seconds of a call. And that prediction is about 80 to 85% accurate. Super exciting. But a false alert or a misread there has a direct impact if there's a material action that you will take or not take based on that particular read. And so I think, those things obviously need to be at the right way to do it. I mean, we've had some interesting interest from security agencies applying these use cases in national and home security implementations. There is definitely an impact there. You'll be making a decision that will impact a human. And so I'd say the way to sort of mitigate that as the technology continues to improve is to have a human element added to it. So you're going to make a decision based on an outlying signal, which is what you're looking to do. I mean, there's these averages, but then there are outliers, and that's what you got to focus on. And the role of the technology like this becomes in identifying those outliers and putting it in front of a human. It's like, hey, you need to pay more attention to this. And so then you're eliminating some of that risk by having a second set of eyes and brains, which is in this case is a human brain and a human set of eyes and ears to sort of focus on. And because the decision that you're eventually going to make is going to be crucial and impactful to a human, more so than pairing with a call center agent, which may not be the best fit. Because currently in that use case, you're competing with randomness, which is really such a low bar that if you make a wrong decision, you're still always going to be an order of magnitude better than random.
So you've talked about some interesting use cases about the future of this technology, whether it's AGI, robotics, you mentioned buy intent, maybe homeland security. Polish your crystal ball. Tell us, let's say in a decade when behavioral signals technology is ubiquitous and just in general, kind of this nascent field of emotional behavioral science using voice is ubiquitous. How's the world a different place? How is yours or my day-to-day life different?
Yeah, so I think, technology such as AIMC, first off, has the potential to influence almost every aspect of our relationships and communications from, sales, support, to doctor-patient conversation, etc. And by providing a means by which to enhance without assigning additional responsibility to the individuals in a conversation, we're able to better match the right responses to the right moment. And essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to really find your internal superpowers as a human and then maximizing the ability towards that. And the continued role of AI in predicting our intent, providing supplements to our conversation and relationships, buffering against negative interaction will serve to enhance communication in a significant way in the future. I'd say we're just at the starting point. And emotional artificial intelligence is currently being used to develop machines that are capable of reading, responding to, interpreting, and imitating human affect, the way we as humans experience and express emotions. What does this mean for consumers, right? It means your devices, such as your smartphone, your smart speakers, will be able to offer you an interaction that feels more natural than ever before, simply by reading the emotional cues in your voice. And as reliance on AI grows, so does the need for emotionally intelligent AI. It's one thing to ask your virtual assistant to read your today's game score, but entirely another thing to entrust your aging parents to the care of an AI-driven bot. And currently, AI may be able to do incredible things like diagnose medical conditions and outline treatments, but it still needs emotional intelligence to communicate with patients in a more human way. And so I think, if I look forward, 10, 15 years out, you would find a lot of these interactions providing incredible amount of value and unique experiences in our daily lives. some which are potentially very hard to imagine. And what we're doing as a company, obviously, as I said, we're sort of, focused on a sliver of the opportunity, which is the human to human interaction in a business setting, which for the most part manifests itself in a call center. But the human to human interaction has many dynamics outside of the call center. And also the big kahuna is the human to machine interaction, which we're going to do a lot more of. And, our technology like this will create incredible experiences, emotional and behavioral savvy experiences in those human to machine dynamics down the line.
Ron, I've got to get you off the hot seat, but I'm not letting you go without answering one last question for me. So we opened up by having you share a little bit about your background, amazing, distinguished career. You mentioned cricket, we talked about Kronos, ties, and then the last 4-ish years with behavioral signals. Tell our audience something that you've learned about yourself over the career.
I think one thing I've learned about myself is, which I'd say is almost sort of like, obvious, but unless you're really focused on it, you kind of tend to miss, is that we tend to achieve everything that we achieve or feel proud of, as a function of who we're working with and who's around us, who's in the team. And that above all matters over everything else. It matters over our personal abilities, our skills, our thought processes. All of those things are important. But at the end of the day, your team and the folks that you're collaborating with, the overall amalgam of your capabilities is that. And that's something it's really obvious to me at this point of my career. I look back at all of those opportunities and successes and how it was achieved and what was done. And I sometimes reminisce over, so many people who had so much value who probably didn't get their dues or weren't recognized. But those small points of inflection eventually add up. I'm just a lot more sensitive towards that right now. And I'd say in my earlier days, while I was sort of, in those moments, I was just oblivious to those things. It feels really enlightening to sort of, be aware of those things and to sort of recognize that as I continue with my new journeys and newer adventures.
You're speaking to a lot of listeners who are interested in careers in AI and machine learning. What's one kind of unmet human need? Aside from, I don't mean this as a commercial for behavioral signals, but some unmet human need that you think could be fulfilled in the next decade, 20 years, 30 years using AI and machine learning?
I'd say it's going to be so hard to pick just one. There are so many opportunities. If you're focused on solving for a problem using AI and machine learning, I'll go back to that example that I used, right? So if you're a machine learning enthusiast, or if you're a software programmer and you're looking to apply your capability towards an implementation, my suggestion is to, not get too focused on necessarily, how do I compete with a human? And that tends to be the larger focus in the AI spectrum, and that also gives the AI world a lot of angina. I mean, there's a lot of concern around, AI replacing humans and, other things. I think those thought processes are extremely exaggerated. There are thousands of use cases and business problems where the process is random, right? And so I'd say, if you have to apply the technology where competing with randomness. You can create instant value, immediate value, versus competing with another human ability that you're trying to replicate on the software side. Obviously, that's also important. And so that's where the application of the technology comes into play. Obviously, the technology, itself would be the choice of whoever's going after it. I see tremendous amount of potential in the human-to-human interactions, but also on the healthcare side, on the overall consumer experience side. We're living very different lives, and our lives are changing dynamically. Not only we're more atomic families and nuclear families, but also now it's distributed work environments, agent work environment, no longer sort of a sense of loyalty to a particular career. We're becoming more specialized in skill sets. And with that, the tools are getting outdated. And there are newer set of tools that are being built, and you can apply that to sort of optimize those experiences. Those are low-hanging fruits that can be grabbed right now. You don't have to wait for 5-10 years to apply the technology to.
Rana, where can the audience learn more about you and the work that the team is doing at Behavioral Signals?
So the best way to learn more about behavioral signals is to go to our webpage, which is behavioralsignals.com. We are very active in the research space as well. So we actively publish papers on public corpora, and we're also, very open to sharing our engines and research. So that's the best place to go for that. I'm relatively active on social media myself, so feel free to connect with me on Twitter, LinkedIn, other places. Happy to listen to what you have and see if there's opportunities for us to work together.
This has been a lot of fun, and I appreciate you letting me go way off script.
That was the intent.
Absolutely. Well, we're just getting started. I hope maybe you'll come back another time and we'll explore some of the topics that we had scheduled in more detail.
Yeah, I would love to flesh this out a little bit more. There's so much more to talk about.
Excellent. Well, Rana, we're all rooting for you and the team to succeed. This was a fun one. Thanks for hanging out.
Thank you, Dan, and thanks for having me on this.
Well, that's a wrap for this week on AI and the Future of Work. I'm your host, Dan Turchin. But of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.